Hi, I'm Paul Marcel. I wanted to do a review today of the Festool OF-2200 router. That's this big beast hiding back here. Now I'm going to do this as a bit of a comparison also to the OF-1400 router, that's smaller cousin, just because a lot of us are much more familiar with this 1400 router. Me personally, I've used this one for many years now, whereas this one here is definitely very new. It still has that new car smell to it. Now both of these routers are plunge routers, so they have a nice plunge mechanism. It's a little different than some of the other routers, as you've seen in some of my previous reviews. Now this one here, in their standard kit that you get, at least the North American kit, you're going to get the router itself, you're going to get a chip catcher, and then you're going to get a guide bushing adapter. Now what this one does is it takes the sort of de facto standard Porter cable guide bushings like you see in this adapter that I have for the 1400. So it's just one of the ones where it's a two-piece unit that gets screwed in. So this makes it great that at least domestically a lot of us already have some guide bushings, so you can take advantage of those with your router immediately. And then you also get the spanner wrench. But that's about it, because there's not a lot of room left in that box after you put all those things in there with that beast. Now in doing a bit of a comparison between the 1400 and the 2200, we can take a look at some of the accessories that come with the 1400 itself. I mean, there's the guide rods, there's the adapter for the guide bushings, there's a chip catcher as well. Now both of these function the same way. They're attached a little differently that we'll go over later. Spanner wrench. These are accessories here. The edge guide and the guide stops are external accessories that you have to purchase separately. There's also this little dust catcher here that most of us have used. Now the way that this fits onto a 1400 is you clip it into place here when you got the bit in place and snap it. Now when the bit is down low, this is going to help catch some of the dust. Now that works really, really well. Now one of the things that's bad about this connection is that you've got a pretty sharp angle here for the dust to go through. And I find that actually because of that I don't get as much collection as I was really liking. With the 2200, the way the dust port works is it's a rod that comes up along the back and then it comes down into this cylinder. Now there's also a 90-degree turn there for the dust to take, but one of the differences is that there's this little tiny, you can see this piece of plastic here that acts as a column. Back here there's a release, and this portion here is going to come down. Now when I go to plunge this router, lock it in a place that's a little bit nicer, you can see that basically this has formed a whole column for the dust to stay captured in. So even if it's having a difficult time catching the dust, it's certainly going to have more than enough opportunity with that dust swirling around. The dust collection on this shroud is definitely significantly better than on this shroud here. Whether this one is bad for you or not is a whole different story. I mean, this one's very good, but this one is just exceedingly better. Many of the other parts of the two routers are very similar in their function. You have a variable speed control here, 0 to 6, or 1 to 6 as usual. You have a micro adjuster up here, which is slightly different than the 1400, and I'll go over that in a moment. There's of course the plunge depth stop, where you have some plunge rods down here. There are a few differences in the way that the 2200 operates versus the 1400 that I'll go over that are significant. And then this latch here, now there is a green latch here that's for removing this dust shroud. Then there's some latches here for removing the guide bushing plates that get inserted. This one here is actually to remove the entire base. So the entire base comes off on the 2200 when you flip this lever. You flip this up and then it releases it. So what they've done is they've made it it's very simple to change out the bases, and there are a variety of bases for different uses that we'll go over later. This is the base that comes with the kit, and if you buy the accessory kit for the OF-2200, there's an additional 4 bases, at least in the North American version of that kit. Now the way that the chip catcher works, you've seen how it works on the 1400, is that this simply snaps in. There's 2 holes here. You take this, and you push it into place, and it's snapped into place. The way that you release it, there's these 2 little green levers. If you pull those, push those together rather, they'll just fall right out. Now for the 2200, what you do is you capture it underneath the base. So you'll take this piece here, let's put the chip catcher on instead. Line up the holes, there's little tabs here, so that's what's going to help catch it into place. Put that in, and snap it home. So it's actually captured underneath the base, which is really nice in the sense that with this router, because of the base and the way that this snaps into place, you're going to be running this over top of your stock. Now that's generally not a problem, and that's actually something that you want. But it seems to me that this is a little bit better of a design, because you could change the size of this base plate to be very small around your bit, and at the same time the guide bushing is going to be inside the base. So let me snap that out so you can see. If we were to put one here, and I could let go of it, then we could just put this plate back on, snap it in place. So now you can see how this is recessed back. So I think that's a little bit superior to that, especially because there are some base plates where this comes in to be smaller. So as a preview of one of the bases that you can see from the accessory kit, you can see this is the same version but with a much smaller hole. If we were to put that in place, you can see that the guide bushing itself would have only the business end of it sticking out. You'd have a far better surface for passing that over top of the stock. Now for the bit change is the same. You have these little ratcheting levers so you can ratchet it either way. While you use the spanner wrench to set it, it makes it very easy to take the bits in and out, especially when you set it down on its square side. One other difference between the two routers is how the guide rods attach. Now, their mechanism for attaching is still the same. You have the little slots on both sides, and then you have a knob that locks it in place. So you can stick the rods all the way through both sides. You can have attachments there like I showed on the 1400 review. And then, of course, there's an edge guide. Now, the edge guide for both routers is an accessory, and I'll go over the accessories for the 2200 in more detail. But one thing to notice about this router is that when you're using it, the guide rods come off at 90-degree angle to the router. That's something that we're kind of used to. You put it here and you run it along while you're plowing either an edge or maybe a groove that's close to the edge. That's very, very normal. Now, with the 2200, and this actually gives me a chance to show you a little bit more about the ergonomic handles. You can see how the handles lean forward on this. So when you grab it, it's got a really comfortable feel. It's the perfect angle with the router being, at the right height for work. Now, the way that the guide rods attach is the same way. You got a little knob here, and then the rods go through. I guess this is actually a good chance to point this out, that the 2200 comes with an integral power cable, whereas like the 1400 uses the plug-in attachment that we're most familiar with. If you look at the gauge of the wire, it isn't the gauge of the wire that's a reason for that. The only thing I can think of is that this router, being a 2200 watt router, can draw up to 18 amps of power, and that basically would swamp your CT vacuum if you were using that on the dust extractor port, drawing power from there as well. So basically the idea is if you need a router this big, they know that you're going to be taking more power than is going to be available off of the dust extractor port. So we might as well make it a separate cord that you're going to plug elsewhere. That's the only reasoning I can come up with. Whereas with this one here, you can actually do quite a bit of work with it attached directly to the CT unless you're really loading it, since this will draw only up to 12 amps of power at maximum load. So, okay, power cord aside, back to the way that the edge guide connects. If you take a look, this is the way that the router would normally go. But the edge guide is not coming off of it at 90 degrees. It's coming kind of back towards me at around 30 degrees. So why would that be? It turns out it's got a great reason for it. If we go back to running it on an edge here, you can see that when I get this on the edge, my router is pointing into the material. So as I grab these handles and I just normally push, I'm actually pushing into the stock. So it forces you to, in an ergonomic manner, to register the fence to the side of the stock. So even when I'm just pushing this normally, it naturally wants to go into the stock, keeping that fence registered. So that's a really nice change that they made with that router. Now, a few of the accessories for the OF-2200 have kind of dribbled into this review as I try to talk about it, but normally you just get that chip catcher and then the adapter for the domestic guide bushings. If you get this accessory kit, which I would highly recommend you get, it's got about everything that you're going to want with this router. You're going to get the edge guide that I was using just previously. You're going to get the guide rods. The guide rods don't come with the router, unlike the 1400. You're also going to get the chip catcher that goes underneath the edge guard. You'll get four different bases. One of the bases is one that I showed you previously, where it just has a smaller hole for the base. But there's also a couple other ones. This one here is more like the older table widener base that the 1400 had, if you remember that from my previous review. So it just gives you a little bit of a longer base off the back. But you should also remember that tip I gave you about using the guide rods and then and then the guide stops, as giving you a very much wider base off to the side. I find that to be much more practical than the wide base, at least on the 1400. But this one here is a good option that it's so quick to snap into place. Now, one of the other bases that's of note is this one here. It looks a lot like the original base, but if you can see it up close, there's a step here. And what that step is it's a 5mm step, which should ring a bell, but that's the difference in height when you're using a guide rail. So when you put the router on this base here, you can, using the guide stops, just like you would on the 2200, on the 1400, you'd have that out here. Notice that they've gotten rid of the two larger pieces for the guide stops. Now they just use a single metal piece in the back for the second piece. It just makes it a little bit easier to, it makes it a lot more compact is all. So I like that change. They might even be able to bring that back to the 1400. Now, you'll run the guide stops here, put the router on it, and then this would sit on the guide rail, and then the step, if I line it up properly, will ride onto your stop. So what's nice about this is that this has eliminated the need for that little tiny foot that you have to put on the outside edge of the 1400. One of the other bases has a bit of a different perforation down here. What this one would be for, this is really what you would want to use in place. When I previously said this base here would be useful with the guide bushings, it's true that it would be useful with the guide bushings, but this one here is actually what it's made for. The reason why is it matches up with the dust pattern that's on the guide bushings, the templates that you have from Festool. So the dust will be able to go right through. Yet you'll still have a lot more surface that's going to run on your stock. This kit also includes a number of the Festool templates. So these are the Festool, well, they call them copy rings. We often call them guide bushings. So there's, normally there's 3 in the kit. The 4th one comes with your OF-2200. I forgot about that earlier. If we were to go over a few of the specifications between these two routers, I mean the 1400 watts, 2200, 2200 watts. So the draw on this router is going to be 12 amps, whereas the potential draw of this router is going to be 18 amps. So this one here could actually overload your typical 15 amp circuit. Now if you're running in a shop garage or anything like that, typically by code those have to be 20 amp anyway, but you'll want to verify that you're capable of running it, not popping a breaker with it. Another consideration between the two routers is weight. The 1400 weighs in at 9.9 pounds, whereas the 2200 weighs in at 17.5 pounds. Now, of course, you're putting in a bit like this, you can add another pound. But a lot of people get concerned about that weight, and I'm never altogether sure why, because it's very rare that I'm going to be routing like this. In fact, I'd say never. So I actually like the weight of this router. Now, sure, it's a little bit hefty when you got to lift it up, and maybe there might be reasons, personal reasons where you might have a difficult time with a larger router like that. But generally, once you lift this thing up and you put it down in your stock, there you go, you're done. Now you just have to guide it. And actually, this weight is going to be in your favor for some safety issues, because if you hit something like an internal knot or something in there that normally would make the bit jump the router back, this one has so much more mass that it's going to be difficult for that bit to kick it back. So it's going to force it to go cut through and not throw it back at you. Whereas with the 1400 and the other lighter routers, and even the 1400 is a lot safer in that regard, because this router is still heavier than a number of the other routers I've ever tinkered with. So weight is in your favor for these things. So with the dust collection accessories that are available for the two, like all the routers that Festool makes, they're going to work with both the D27 hose and also the D36 hose. Now, your preference is always for a router, use the D36. You need a lot more airflow to get those chips out of there for the evacuation. So with the 1400, again, it's the same size port where this one, it will fit inside, whereas the 27 will fit inside. So you can do the same thing back here on the 2200. But don't do that. Put a 36 on there. You'll be happy. So in showing you that, you got to see this little adapter that I've got here. Now, it was an idea that somebody posted on the FOG, and I regret that I don't remember who. But now this, as a single kit that you can order, you can buy it actually from Bob. He goes ahead and makes these. And some of the other dealers may go ahead and make them as well. So what's nice about it is I've now put my D36 hose up on my boom arm, so I always have this available, which is great for the TS75. It does much better on the dust collection, especially off the MFT. And then also if I do any routing, of course, this is my preference. But then when I need to do things with a domino or one of the sanders, you just take this and insert it in there, and now that's what I've got. It's perfect.